This is Laura. We're going to get started promptly at 7 o'clock this evening, so in about 4 more minutes. As you're logging in, if you would like to, at the very top right-hand corner of your screen, you may see a button that says View. You can go ahead and click that and select how you'd like to view the presentation this evening. Both gallery and speaker view are excellent. My suggestion would be to set your view, to speaker view. That way, whichever speaker is presenting will be the most highlighted or the largest screen.
Welcome to everyone. I am Kowalski Salter, the Executive Director of the 1st Division Museum, and we would like to welcome you to our very first Date with History to kick off 2021. So first of all, I would like to welcome those of you back who have been joining us for the last few months, the last few years, and indeed the last few decades for this popular program, Date with History. And those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome, welcome, welcome. And we hope you continue to tune in. And I think most of you know about 8 months ago, with the great help of my colleague, Laura, who has done a great job in reimagining what Date with History should look like in this pandemic. We went virtual and she's just done a great job, and we appreciate what she has done to not only continue to bring great speakers in, but to do this platform in a virtual format where we can welcome so many people. And I did beg her yesterday to give me 8 to 10 minutes on the front end to welcome you to 2021 and talk to you a little bit about what we intend to do this year and some of the other programs that we are establishing. So first of all, like last year, we had 3 themes. We have 3 major themes this year, although we will do other programs. So our first theme is, this is the 30th anniversary of Desert Storm. And our first program is tonight, and I will talk about that. But we also have a second program, I believe on the 24th of February, which will allow us to continue this series. And if things work out, understanding that we are in a pandemic, we may have a pop-up exhibition as well dedicated to the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, I should say. And our second major theme, this is also the 75th anniversary. Well, let's go back one slide, Laura. The 75th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials after World War II. And the Big Red One was the division where soldiers were tapped to be elite guards at the Nuremberg trials. So we are going to highlight that later on this year with a few programs, and Laura is already working on that with a few of our teammates. And also this is the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So we will have several programs, maybe at least 1, if not 2, associated with 9/11. And depending on where we are in the pandemic, we also have an artifact at the 1st Division Museum, beams from the World Trade Center. We may have a program on Cantini Park, but we cannot really say that just yet. And so those are our 3 themes, but we are not only going to focus on those. So the next slide, if you will, Laura, we will continue on with some of the themes we had last year. So we will do more programs this year associated with women and women in the military and women associated with the military and minorities in the military, and what was called years and decades ago, hyphenated Americans. And so next month, we are very excited to bring one of our speakers from last year back, who spoke from Pearl Harbor on the battleship USS Missouri. Neil Yamamoto will come back and talk to us about the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. And, this is one of my favorite historical units. Showing some of my cards, this is a unit that I did some research and writing on, not only this unit, but Asian Pacific Americans in the military. So not only talking about Japanese Americans. So tune in for this program and look at our schedule of events for this entire year, because we fully intend to continue on with our mission and vision to offer more inclusive programming to our guests. And last but not least, I'm very excited to roll out to you. Yes, the next slide. Our newest program, and this is the first. We started working on this about 16 months ago, shortly after I got here, to have an embedded travel program associated with the 1st Division Museum. And we named it Footsteps of the First. The first one will be this year, September 5th through 16. Go to the website. And of course, this is pandemic situation dependent. And it's going to be from Normandy to the Bulge, the Battle of the Bulge. So we're roughly talking about June 6, 1944 to mid-January 1945. But this is not going to be, for those of you who have been on a staff ride, your ordinary staff ride. It sounds like a military program, but it is peppered with a host of cultural events. So those of you who like French and European cuisine, there's a breakfast, lunch, and dinner on most days. So if you don't eat 3 meals a day, don't worry about it. If you like wine, we have a wine tasting as a part of this program. And I won't say too much about it. I want you to go to the website. The entire itinerary is out there. I had the pleasure of doing one of these programs as an expert several years ago, and we have many experts in the 1st Division Museum, and our expert for this program will be Jackie Gillespie. So please join us for more Date with Histories. And I will tell you, this is limited capacity. We are already at 40% of minimum and 20% of maximum. And so all expenses paid once you pay for the trip, except for your travel plans. And so lastly, and I'm getting close to my 8 minutes, thank you to our guests for continuing to join us. Thank you to Laura and my teammates for helping us bring great programs to our audience in this pandemic era. And I can transition, Laura. I only took 7 minutes. So thank you for the 8 to 10 minutes. So what I want to do now is do what I normally do every other event or so, is to introduce our speakers. So we are very blessed tonight to have Jim Corrigan kick us off tonight with one of our first themes, which is the 30th anniversary of Operation Desert Storm. And so Jim holds degrees from Penn State and Johns Hopkins. He has written for American History Magazine, among other publications, and is the author of more than a dozen books on military history topics. And one of his most recent books, I believe it was published in 17 or 18, but very recently, is Desert Storm Air War. And it really looks at the strategy, and not only from the strategic point of view, but those who were flying the aircraft during the war. And so, you know, when you have a historian who goes deep down, I can talk about it maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but we have the expert here tonight. And so remember, we're going to give Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, up until about 8 o'clock, give or take, to talk. And we're going to save the last 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. Again, don't use the hand raise feature. Use the type in your questions, correct, Laura?
Yeah, if you could use the Q&A button at the bottom, there should be a little, it looks like a little talk bubbles. It says Q&A. Go ahead and use that feature. I'll be getting your questions.
And she's going to get to as many as she can. And I'm going to knock on wood and glass top desks that we have not had any significant technological issues last year. But if we do, we apologize up front. So without any further ado, I don't think I missed anything. So Jim, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kowalski. I'm really happy to be here tonight to help to kick off your 2021 event schedule, especially since tonight, the presentation I'm giving you is I titled it "On the Brink," And that is because tomorrow, 30 years ago, would have been the United Nations deadline for Iraq to withdraw from Kuwait. The Iraqi army, the previous August, had invaded its smaller neighbor, Kuwait, without provocation. And there was a tremendous response from around the world, led by the United States, to stop that aggression and reverse it. And the UN had set this deadline of January 15th for the Iraqi withdrawal. So 30 years ago tonight, the world was on the brink of what looked to be a very serious, significant conflict. At the time, Iraq had what was either the fourth or the fifth largest army in the world. They were dug in to Kuwait and southern Iraq. They had set up minefields and zeroed in artillery and filled trenches with oil, which they planned to set on fire, all to defend what they had taken in August. So, we know what happened, of course. It turned out to be an overwhelming victory for the coalition. But at the time, that certainly was not, that was in question whether that would happen. And it seemed like it would be a very drawn out and bloody affair. But images like this one have come to sort of typify what people think of when they think back about Desert Storm, if they were around then. An Iraqi tank with the turret popped off, American soldiers standing on it. In the background, you have the Kuwaiti oil wells on fire. And it was a 100-hour conflict in terms of the ground war, which, that's what people remember. And they remember also the scores of, really thousands of Iraqi troops surrendering en masse, tens of thousands by the time the conflict was over. So they remember that. And they might remember what's now notoriously remembered as the Highway of Death, which was Iraqi forces flushed out of Kuwait, taking every vehicle they can and trying to flee back to Iraq with all the loot they had taken from Kuwait. And at that point, American air power, coalition air power came in and just devastated this really traffic jam of soldiers retreating back into Iraq. And so these kind of images kind of have left the public with the impression that, Desert Storm might have been easy. And that's where I kind of push back a little bit, because yes, definitely an overwhelming victory, no doubt about that. But it certainly, for the people who lived through it, who fought in it, it was certainly not easy. And so, in addition to talking about what went wrong or what went right during that conflict, I'm going to also show you some images and talk about things that went wrong. And, for example, this photo, medevac helicopter, injured soldiers being evacuated. The sergeant on the left has just been handed the dog tags of a good friend who's in the body bag on the right. And so, my thesis when I wrote the book was to point out that, despite what history might have just classified as a blip, an easy win, there certainly were plenty of experiences like this one, where these people certainly would not think of it as easy. The other main thing that people think about when we talk about the air campaign of Operation Desert Storm is the technology, and this was played up, while it was happening. The overwhelming advantage that the coalition had in air power. This is an F-117 Nighthawk stealth bomber that was the first of its kind. The world had never seen anything like this. An aircraft that could evade radar. At nighttime, it would just show up and could drop laser-guided bombs, pinpoint right on target, and just vanish without any warning. And that was something new that kind of gave the impression that this was kind of like a video game war, is what some people called it. And that was reinforced by an overwhelming advantage with technology such as night vision, infrared, allowed the coalition to carry out a lot of their operations at night. And then Tomahawk missiles, where you could hit a target without even having to send a pilot into danger. So again, you're getting this impression that it was just quick and easy, but that wasn't necessarily the case, again, for many of the people who participated in Desert Storm, such as, an F-16 pilot who was dropping bombs on an oil refinery outside of Baghdad, shot down, taken prisoner. Certainly, it wasn't an easy experience for him. An RAF pilot who was also shot down and taken prisoner. He was tortured and beaten and forced to make a video that aired on Iraqi TV, denouncing the coalition and this unjust war against the people of Iraq, that type of thing. That was, very common for the POWs, the Iraqis captured, mistreated, tortured, used as propaganda tools. So before we go any further, let me just kind of back up a little bit and talk about, first of all, this part of the world, Iraq, roughly the size of California, and then you can see a little Kuwait, which is about the size of New Jersey. And Iraq in 1990 was about 10 years into the reign of Saddam Hussein, who shortly after taking power started a war with neighboring Iran. And that lasted 8 years. It was just completely brutal. We're talking chemical weapons, child soldiers, indiscriminate bombing of cities, just a really horrible war that ultimately ended in a stalemate, all those lives lost over nothing, and left Iraq, despite its oil reserves, in terrible financial shape.
Jim, I apologize to interrupt. I had a couple guests comment about the volume. If you could speak up just a little bit louder, I think
sure.
that will help a lot of our guests.
Sure.
And to also reminder, if you're able to turn the volume on your computers as far up as you can, we'll try and troubleshoot if you're having a little hard time hearing tonight. Thank you, everybody.
All righty. Yeah, let me know if it doesn't improve. But in any case, the Iran-Iraq war left Iraq in bad financial shape. And Saddam Hussein is trying to figure a way out of it. He's looking at little Kuwait right next door, lots of oil there, minimal defenses. 1990, we're talking about, the Soviet Union has collapsed, so that's no longer in the picture. The United States, the sole superpower, is kind of distracted by that. So he's thinking, well, I can just kind of grab Kuwait and all its oil and solve my problems in one fell swoop. So that was the thinking, that was the motivation that Saddam Hussein had in 1990. He figured no one's really watching. I can kind of move in and take control of Kuwait. And that's exactly what happened on August 2nd. The tanks rolled in. Kuwait's defensive forces could only offer limited resistance. So the invasion took 48 hours, right through the entire Emirate of Kuwait, from north to south, right up to the Saudi Arabian border. And that was it. It was over. Just as kind of a side note, it's been talked about. I know Norman Schwarzkopf talked about this in his autobiography, that if Saddam had just contented himself with a portion of Kuwait, like take the top third, and with like you can see the shared oil field, he could have taken that, maybe some of the coastal islands, some of the coastline. Probably the world would not have reacted the way it did. You certainly would have seen condemnation and sanctions, that type of thing, but a military response probably would not have been the case. So that would have been an interesting development, but that's not the way it worked out. He decided he wanted all of Kuwait, and so within just a couple of days, you're looking at division upon division, right up to the Saudi border, in some instances crossing over the border, forays across the border. And this makes not just the United States, but the entire world very nervous, because the loss of Kuwait's bad enough as far as, just from the pure perspective of the world's petroleum supply. But Saudi Arabia, that's an even would be a bigger blow. And the Saudis, they have a decent air force, but their land forces would not be up to the task of holding off an Iraqi invasion. So you see this instant response of first the U.S. saying to Saudi King Fahd, can we help? He says, yes, please help. So the American F-15 Eagles, a couple squadrons, are the first to go to help bolster the Saudi Air Force. And then once that happens, they can start sending in ground troops. So big transport planes start coming in. The first units to arrive and go out into the desert to try to put up a defense, they called themselves speed bumps, because they knew that if the Iraqis came across the border, they would not be able to hold off all that armor. They had to hopefully slow it down. So, but they were just the first. Much more was on the way. So, as you can see here, Desert Shield, Operation Desert Shield is the defense of Saudi Arabia. And that got going pretty quickly. Massive airlift, ships coming into ports, but that would take time. Airlift was the most expedient way to get things started. And you see the big aircraft bringing in material, troops to defend Saudi Arabia from further aggression. These are this would have been a very common scene all across the Persian Gulf of the transport planes coming in, C-141s in front. In the background, you can see some C-5 Galaxies. Those are the really big planes. Here, offloading some vehicles. If you ever have an opportunity at say like an air show to walk through one of those. It's amazing. You can put an 8-lane bowling alley in a C5. But one point I tried to make was that just the very act of mobilizing, of deploying, in and of itself can be dangerous. When you're moving all these people, all this material, these huge machines, there's a chance, things can go wrong. And that happened very early in Desert Shield, one of these humongous C5s leaving Germany for Saudi Arabia, had an engine malfunction and crashed into a forest, just tumbled out into a field, broke apart. Everyone who was in the front of the aircraft was killed. A few people in the back survived. I talked to a couple of them, and they just described this incredible experience of one of them said it was like just being inside a clothes dryer, just tumbling and waiting for the end. So even before shots are fired, there's the potential for danger. I'm trying not to hit you with too many maps, but I just wanted to show you the area and the airfields that were available to the coalition. As you can see, there's quite a few spread out. You're talking about a very large area here. And so any type of air operations are going to require a lot of fuel to travel all these distances. That means tankers. So that's something else. The tanker planes are going to have to be up to refuel any planes going out on a mission. F-16s, kind of the workhorse of the U.S. Air Force, came in squadron after squadron. These are FA-18 Hornets, the United States Marines. Every possible air base was just crammed with aircraft throughout the fall of 1990. They just kept coming. Lots of times, right next to an airport with commercial operations going on, you have military operations going on. They're sharing runways. Aircraft carriers began moving into the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. So you have Navy air power coming into, and not just U.S. air power, but also the coalition. All of these countries are contributing forces. This photo, this single flight, has not just the U.S. planes, but also a plane from France, from Qatar, and from Canada. And the Kuwaitis. Some of the Kuwaiti pilots were able to escape on the night of the invasion. Sometimes as their airbase was being overrun, they were able to take off and flee to a friendly country. They, as you can see, they stenciled "Free Kuwait" on their planes, and they were very eager to participate in the liberation of their country. The coalition was built. I mean, the architect really was George H.W. Bush, the 41st president, who had been a World War II aviator, was shot down bombing a Japanese island, waited offshore in the water for rescue. Fighters had to hold back Japanese gunboats that were coming out to try to capture him until finally he was rescued by a submarine. So this is a man who understands war, the importance of air power, and he's dedicated his life to public service. He's been in Congress. He was director of the CIA. He was an ambassador to the UN. So certainly He knows people all around the world, government all around the world. He knows how to build relationships, build this coalition. And by the time it's all said and done, a total of 35 nations have signed on. This slide just shows countries that donated troops, that contributed forces, but there were also nations that sent resources, medical personnel, that type of thing. And back to the map once more. So by the time we're getting to the end of Desert Shield, this is what it looks like. I realize this might not show up very well, but these are all the air bases just crammed with aircraft, ready to what is now talking about the liberation of Kuwait. We realize Saudi Arabia is safe, and now the focus, the world's focus, has shifted to taking back Kuwait. The air campaign, the leader is General Chuck Horner, who he was a Vietnam combat veteran. And that's a very common theme in Desert Storm, is that you see soldiers, sailors, airmen who, when they were young, served in Vietnam, saw the mistakes leadership had made in that war, and were determined in this war to make sure those mistakes weren't repeated. So who were they up against? The Iraqi Air Force. It varies depending on from unit to unit. You have some combat veterans from the Iran-Iraq War there, flying the latest MiGs, very, very powerful aircraft in skilled hands. But other units, maybe older aircraft, not as much training. But no doubt, formidable force. But Iraq's, for an air war, Iraq's biggest defense would be their ground forces in terms of surface-to-air missiles, radar guided, and anti-aircraft artillery, AAA, that could shoot down aircraft. So this is what gave coalition airmen the greatest pause, was dealing with this very powerful air defense network that Iraq had. Everything was tied in and very robust, and they weren't so much concerned about the Air Force as these defenses on the ground that could shoot them down. And then in addition to all that, we have, what I like to call Saddam's wild cards. So this is Saddam Hussein. This is a person who's willing to do pretty much whatever he can to get what he wants and keep what he wants. And very early on, he made it clear he would pretty much do anything. He rounded up all the foreigners who were in Kuwait. Lots of people work there in the oil industry. You have vacationers, whatever the case may be. Rounded them all up and made it clear that they would be deployed across Kuwait and Iraq as human shields. So here he is with a 5-year-old British boy. This was broadcast on Iraqi television. But the message was to the world pretty clear. We have your citizens. If you try anything, they will be in harm's way. Another wild card that Saddam had was the Scud Missile, a ballistic missile that could be launched very quickly. He had fixed launch sites, but also these mobile launchers, which could be hidden pretty much anywhere and could just pop up, launch a missile, and cause trouble. from a pure military standpoint, not that great of a threat because they're not that accurate, not that great of a warhead, but he planned to use them politically. So not just launch them at anyone within range, such as Saudi Arabia, but also Saddam's thinking, I can fire these at Israel and perhaps draw Israel into the war, and that would create a problem for the coalition because you have Arab members of the coalition who are already fighting against Arab brothers, and once you bring in Israel, that might create a problem inside the coalition, and that's what he's looking to do, is to just create any type of chaos he can to drive the coalition members apart. So that brings us up to the UN deadline, January 15th. It's pretty obvious that Iraq's not going to withdraw their forces from Kuwait, and there's going to be a war. CNN has a camera in Baghdad, a camera crew, and just the camera pointed at the skies. Everyone's waiting for this to happen, right? And so that was the first two, live coverage of a war as it's about to happen from inside the enemy capital, right? So everybody's waiting, 15th passes, nothing happens. The 16th of January passes and nothing happens. And then on the night of January 17, 2 flights of Apache helicopters slip across the Iraqi border and take out 2 early warning radar stations. So it all started with Army aviation. They knock out these 2 radar sites, and that creates a narrow corridor through which the coalition bombers can rush into Iraq. And that's how it began. And then things very quickly started to happen once that began. This is from my book, and I realize it may not show up that great, but I wanted to give you a sense of everything that was happening on the night of January 17th. You have just aircraft filling the skies over Iraq and Kuwait. We'll get back to the F-117 Nighthawks because they played a very important role on that night and would continue thereafter. These are the stealth aircraft. These guys operate very differently from other types of aircraft. They travel alone in radio silence. They take very indirect routes to their target, trying to stay off the radar, minimize their radar profile as much as possible, stay invisible. So there were only 2 squadrons in existence, both in Saudi Arabia. The first wave, when on the night that it started, the first wave is already over Baghdad, the first wave of F-117s. And so they refuel on their way. It's a very long flight from their base in southern Saudi Arabia all the way to Baghdad. In complete silence, they fly to Baghdad. They're overhead when it starts. And so there's just, you can see all the AAA, all the anti-aircraft. They're up there, and no one knew for sure if they were going to be able to do this. This is new technology, right? Not really proven yet. And they themselves didn't know if it was going to work, the F-117 pilots. In fact, they pretty much accepted that they were going to lose at least a couple aircraft. They just hoped it wouldn't be more than that. So, but what happens is they are able to fly their routes through all this AAA and deliver their bombs on target, laser guided precision. And now they fly radio silent, so no one knows what's going on. But back in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where the Tactical Air Command Center was, they have this, you know, the TV's on, the CNN live feed, and so they're watching, and all of a sudden that CNN loses its feed out of Baghdad, and a cheer goes up across the TAC because they know that the Nighthawks have knocked out what they call the AT&T building in Baghdad, which is a main line for communications. The CNN line passed through there. That building was flattened, and that would continue. That was a major priority in the early days of the air campaign, was to knock out communications. So what you had was F-117 strikes by night and Tomahawk cruise missiles by day, attacking Baghdad just around the clock. Excuse me. I'm more accustomed to listening than I am to talking, but in any case, you have this just this round-the-clock, nonstop attack on Baghdad, knocking out high-value targets, especially communications. But the problem is the stealth aircraft, what you give up is a lot of tonnage, right? These aircraft only carry 2 bombs, and that's it. So it's great for precision strikes on single targets, but what the war planners back in Riyadh wanted to do was really hit Baghdad hard. Of course, there's the B-52 bombers, which can certainly do that, but they're vulnerable. They're not stealth by any means, and you know, you don't want to bomb civilians in a city. That was certainly something that the coalition wanted to avoid. So the planners are thinking, what can we do? We want to get more bombs on Baghdad, more than what we're getting with the F-117s and the Tomahawks. So F-16s, you don't have the stealth component, certainly, but they can carry far more ordnance under their wings. And so the air planners came up with, they put together what they called Package Q, which was this enormous flight of aircraft that would, on day 3, just day 3 of the air campaign, they are going to go to Baghdad and try to put some heavy bombs on Baghdad. And this was risky. This was risky. So again, as we said, we're talking about a lot of space to cover here. So these F-16s gather up over Saudi Arabia. They have to hit the tankers and fuel up before they can go into Iraq. Package Q is not so lucky in terms that the weather has turned very bad. And so, as you can imagine, refueling aircraft in midair is not easy under normal conditions, but in bad weather, that makes it even more difficult. So what you have is the tankers, the planes trying to draw fuel in rough weather. Not a good situation. They get to the Iraqi border, and some of the planes haven't been able to refuel, so they have to turn back. And then the Iraqis saw this coming way far away. The early warning radar saw this. So as soon as they cross the border, you've got flak filling the skies. So now they're being harassed by that. On their way to Baghdad, they press on, and when they get there, it's just not, it's a very difficult situation. Just kind of put it in perspective, Baghdad at this point is more heavily defended than Hanoi would have been at the height of the Vietnam War. So you're looking at tons of AAA, tons of surface-to-air missiles. I highlighted the 614th Tactical Fire Squadron, the Lucky Devils, because they, unfortunately, on this day, they were not lucky at all. They arrived over Baghdad. One of their planes got shot down pretty quickly. Pilot ejected, was captured as soon as he got to the ground. Another plane was hit. He tried to limp away, but didn't get very far until he had to bail. He was captured as soon as he touched the ground. And then a third pilot who truly was lucky and skilled, he managed to evade 6 SAMs that had locked onto him, a total of 6 missiles on his way out of Baghdad. He got his bombs off, and while he's leaving, 6 missiles are coming after him, and he evades them all. The image on the right is a screenshot from the video from his plane, which this is actually available on YouTube. So if you want to watch the full thing, it's really fascinating. Just go to YouTube and search for, I think it's like F-16 pilot dodges 6 SAMs or something like that. And you can hear him grunting and breathing heavily as he's trying to evade these missiles that have locked onto him, and he manages to do it. So let's talk a little bit about, this is one of my favorite aircraft, the A-10 Thunderbolt, also known as the Warthog, which, is well known today, but back in 1990 was not, let's say it was not beloved by the Air Force. This is an Air Force plane, but not really beloved because it's a slow ground support aircraft designed to destroy tanks, basically, and other armored vehicles. You can see that 6-barrel Gatling gun cannon in its nose. It's meant to just fight low and slow. Air Force generals, they like fast and multi-role. They don't want something that's just dedicated to one role, which is in this case ground support. So there was jokes throughout the Air Force. A-10s were kind of like the Rodney Dangerfield. I get no respect. There was a joke that the A-10 cockpit doesn't have a clock, just a calendar. The A-10 is a serious risk from bird strikes from behind. So very early on, the A-10s deployed to the Persian Gulf, but they didn't play much of a role in the beginning. In fact, they were mostly limited in the early days to Scud hunting. So the Scuds, as I mentioned, the missiles that Saddam had, he had them out, the missile carriers out in the desert, hidden out in the desert. And so the planners sent A-10s out scouring the desert, looking for these very well hidden missile transporters. And that is really a waste of their talent and not very effective. In fact, the Scud problem never really was solved. The coalition never really did come up to an answer for that. There was the the Patriot Missile, which was an interceptor, a missile that shot down a missile, and was thought to be very effective at the time, but later on studies showed that it really didn't hit that many Scuds. It was just good luck that they didn't hit more than they did, and bad luck in certain instances, because in at least one instance, a Scud fell on a warehouse that was housing troops and killed many people. So the A-10 then is retasked at last, because we're getting close to the point where it's getting close to starting the ground war. And the ground commanders are saying, hey, we're seeing all these strikes on Baghdad, but how much can you make the rubble in Baghdad bounce? You know, how about hitting the frontline troops, the Iraqi frontline troops, because that's what we're going to be facing. And so you see the A-10s being redeployed to knock out Iraqi armor on the front lines very effectively. They're at last, the A-10 pilots are able to do what they were trained to do, and they're doing a very good job, to the point that the air planners decide, all right, well, this is working so well, we're going to send the A-10s deep into Iraq after Saddam's Republican Guard divisions, which is the real power behind the Iraqi army. He held those in reserve, and so the plan was to send the A-10s deep into Iraq and attack the Republican Guard divisions. And they had some success, but this is not an aircraft that's meant to go on deep strike missions. And so they start coming back, shot up pretty good, in some instances not coming back at all. So at that point, Riyadh decides, okay, maybe we shouldn't send the A-10s that deep into Iraqi territory after losing a few of the aircraft. In terms of planes being shot down, combat, search and rescue, this is actually an F-14 pilot who was shot down. Kind of an interesting story. He and his radar intercept officer flying over central Iraq, hit by a missile, have to bail out. They lose sight of each other in the clouds. And when they get to the ground, they're walking around trying to find each other. The radar intercept officer is captured by Bedouins and turned over to the Iraqi army. This pilot realizes, oh, maybe I shouldn't be walking around here in broad daylight. So he uses his helmet to dig a hole and decides to wait until nightfall. Fortunately, flight of A-10s makes contact with him, and they narrow down his position. The rescue helicopters come in. They're about to come in and pick him up. An Iraqi truck starts barreling towards the pilot's position. So one of the A-10s rolls in and knocks out the truck. And then as soon as that happens, the rescue helicopters come in and pick this guy up. That was a great success story. Search and rescue didn't go as great in Desert Storm as they had hoped. In Vietnam, search and rescue, that had been turned into an art form. No matter, it seemed, wherever someone got shot down, the helicopters would come in and pick them up. But things didn't work as great in Desert Storm. Part of the problem was the survival radios that the pilots had were outdated. The Iraqis could triangulate based on those radios, and they captured a lot of the down pilots before search and rescue teams could get to them. F-111s, F-111 Aardvark, these were precision bombers from the Vietnam era. They're all weather, so bad weather didn't stop them. And they played an important contribution in the air campaign, in that they were outfitted with forward-looking infrared. So, and they made a very interesting discovery, which was that on a sunny day, Iraqi armor, tanks would soak up the sun's rays, and then at night, when the desert cooled off, those tanks would glow on their forward-looking infrared. So This was a tremendous benefit to knocking down the Iraqi ground forces, and that these F-111s and other precision bombers could go out at night and find these glowing tanks and knock out up to 100 per night. An Iraqi general after the war, captured general, said, you know, at the start of the war, my men looked on their tanks as a safe place, a place for safety to sleep. They would always want to be in their tanks. By the end of the war, they would sleep far away from their tanks. They wanted nothing to do with being in their tanks when they knew coalition aircraft was around. This is an Iraqi tank that had suffered that fate. Something else the F-111s were able to do was knock out Iraqi Air Force aircraft that were hidden in hardened aircraft shelters. So these shelters, it's like a yard of concrete, reinforced concrete, very thick. You know, Saddam figured, oh, very safe. I won't even put my planes in the air. I will tuck my fighters away in these hardened aircraft shelters until the end of the war, and they'll be safe there. But F-111s found out that if you hit these shelters in just the right angle with one bomb, it creates a hole in the roof. And then a second bomber comes along and tosses a bomb right into that hole. And that way you can knock out whatever's inside. So this, you know, for two bombs, you could destroy perhaps half a dozen fighters. So that was something that Saddam certainly had not counted on. At this point, he's desperate. So he arranges with Iran, his former neighbor, former enemy that he had fought for 8 years. He says, will you take my jets until this war is over, and then I'll take them back? And Iran says, yeah, sure, send your jets over here. We'll hold on to them for you. Well, you can probably imagine how that went out. After the war, Saddam says, okay, I'm ready for my jets back. And the Iranians said, no, we'll hang on to those. They became part of the Iranian Air Force. So he ended up losing all those aircraft to Iran. So like I said,
pardon, Jim, I just want to let you know that we are quickly approaching 8 o'clock, just to be mindful of the time.
All righty. The ground war, Saddam tried to get started quickly, figuring I can inflict casualties that way at least. The Battle of Khafji, he invaded Saudi Arabia, and that didn't work out very well, mostly due to the Marines responding quickly, but also due to air power. An AC-130 gunship was lost during that battle. 14 crewmen were killed. And then Saddam says, okay, if I can't keep if I can't keep Kuwait, then no one else can either. He sets all the oil on fire. He may also have hoped that the smoke would prevent air operations from continuing, but that didn't happen. So we get to the ground war, and this is, the famous left hook of troops not going up the middle, but going far out into the desert, far west, and then sweeping around. And you can see right there in the center is the big red one, pushing in, hitting the Republican Guard divisions as they're fleeing. I always like to tell the story of Major Ronda Cornum, who's a flight surgeon on a Black Hawk helicopter, who was shot down trying to rescue an F-16 pilot. She was just one of two people to survive that crash. She had 2 broken arms, a bullet in her shoulder. The Iraqis captured her. She was sexually assaulted on the way to where they were holding the POWs. She didn't get the medical care she needed at first. Later on, she did, but her story is very inspiring. And she wrote a book about her experiences, which I'd encourage everyone to read. It's very good. This is her right shortly after the war. And then once more with the Highway of Death, where Iraqi soldiers are trying to flee and take everything they can with them out of Kuwait. And at that point, the coalition just unleashed everything that it had in terms of air power on these fleeing troops. They were in tanks and trucks, but also in stolen BMWs and Mercedes or whatever they could get their hands on. And this just stretched for miles. And at that point, the Bush administration decided to bring things to an end. Kuwait had been liberated. And so this kind of marked the end of the war. There was an MIA during the air campaign. Scott Spiker went missing over central Iraq on the first night of the war, and he was in an F-18 Hornet. He did not return to his carrier. No one had heard from him. They thought maybe he diverted to an air base with mechanical control, but he had just vanished. And then a few years later, his wreckage from his aircraft was found in the desert, but there was no canopy, no ejection seats. So they figured he ejected, but they don't know what happened. They didn't know what had happened. They were worried maybe Saddam was holding him secretly. But as it turned out, during the Second Gulf War, while American troops are stationed in that area, they would ask periodically, have you ever heard anything about an American who's been shot down in this area? And they finally got a tip in 2009 of Bedouins had come across a body in the desert and buried it. They found this location and found human remains, and dental records confirmed that it was Scott Spiker. And so those remains were flown home and he buried in Arlington. And at Pensacola Air Base or Naval Air Station, they have a nice memorial to him and of an F-18 Hornet. So that at least was resolved, what became of him. And speaking of memorials, Desert Storm is going to get its own Washington memorial. That is, it should have been under construction already, but with the pandemic, it's been pushed back a little bit. So they're hoping to break ground sometime this year, but there will be a National Desert Storm Memorial. So that's a presentation. I hope if you want to learn more about the air campaign, you'll check out my book. I also maintain a Facebook page. So I invite you to like that. And from what Laura tells me, the book is on sale in your bookstore till the end of the month. So that's great. That's exciting. So thank you for that.
Not even just that. Jim's book, Desert Storm Air War, is for sale online. Cantini Park is closed through the month of January. But if you head over to our website, you can head over to our gift shop online and you can purchase Jim's book. And for the month of January, it is 20% off. And you don't need to fill out any promo codes or worry about that. We already took the price off for you. So you'll see the 20% off price and you can go ahead from there. But we want to thank you so much, Jim, for joining us this evening. We are going to honor our end time at 8:15. So let's get started on some of those questions. Just as a reminder, everybody, I will do my best to get through as many questions as humanly possible. Any questions that I do miss, if you have anything, please send it my way, and I will get them over to Jim, and Jim has graciously offered to answer any dying questions after the fact via email for you.
Sure.
So let's get cooking on these. Our first question was actually something I was thinking about as well. You had been talking about CNN's coverage at the very start from Baghdad. This guest would like to know why was CNN allowed to have a camera crew in the Capitol? Was this a normal kind of procedure, or was this really that unique?
Yeah, I can't say definitively if that's the case. I mean, that is irregular. that was a very unusual situation. We never saw that before. I mean, for those of us back then to be able to watch that, that just was amazing. And there were definitely reporters from all over the world. How CNN had a camera there, I do not know the answer to that one specifically. But I remember watching it broadcasting live with all that AAA and thinking, wow, that's something else.
Another guest wanted to know, was there ever an accurate accounting of ground casualties as a result of the bombing of the Highway of Death?
Okay, so it's believed to be in the low thousands because they think what happened was after the first maybe few minutes, everyone got out of their cars and ran away, right? They abandoned their vehicles. So a lot of those vehicles that were destroyed were empty at the time, but there were definitely soldiers killed during the Highway of Death incident. But there were reports initially that it was in the tens of thousands. That was proven not to be accurate. Definitely more than a few hundred, but not more than a few thousand.
Excellent. Were there any engagements in the air between Iraqi aircraft and U.S. or other coalition aircraft?
There were F-15 Eagles, which were the premier dogfighter at that time, flew cover over all these bombing missions I talked about, and they would knock down Iraqi fighters that would come up to meet the bombers. But after a couple of days of that, Iraq realized that they were out of their league. And so they pretty much stayed on the ground after that.
Oh, this is a really interesting one. I'm so excited to say this. One of our guests who's watching this evening, she piloted one of the search and rescue helicopters, including evacuating wounded from the Scud strike you actually mentioned. So thank you. Thank you for your service. We're so excited to have you this evening.
Yes.
Thank you. Whatever happened to the human shields and the Kuwaiti royal family?
Okay, so I'll answer the Kuwaiti part first. The emirate and his family managed to escape and stayed in Saudi Arabia, although I believe his brother was killed in the palace fighting that happened on the opening night of the invasion. As far as the human shields, that backfired tremendously on Saddam because instead of frightening the coalition members, it really just galvanized their resolve. And he even realized this was a blunder, and he ended up releasing those civilians before the war started.
Wow. You had mentioned bad weather. What would you describe as what was the bad weather?
So yeah, from what I had learned, basically in the wintertime, the Persian Gulf, they have, heavy storms that roll through just like anywhere else, okay? Cold, rain, freezing rain, that type of thing. High winds, very high winds. And typically they, a day or two, and then you get some clear skies. But in 1991, as luck would have it, very bad storms, just one right after another. And so that was what the coalition aircraft pilots had to deal with, because it was terrible.
Wow. How much did the electronic warfare contribute to the success of the air war?
Electronic warfare as in, okay, so there's jamming, radar jamming. So you got those aircraft. They were very much in demand, so that when bombers rolled in, you have these jammers that would flood the Iraqi radars. That was important. And then you also had river joint intelligence aircraft that would intercept Iraqi communications. And that was also very important because they could pick up a lot of intelligence that was very useful in planning airstrikes and so forth.
Oh, this is a great question too. Since Captain Scott Spicer bailed and landed, and we know this, was there any determination how he died, either through autopsy or any of those eyewitnesses?
Yeah, all they had was bones and teeth. So an analysis of the wreckage led them to believe that he was hit by an air-to-air missile. So an Iraqi fighter shot him down is what they're pretty sure. But they don't know. They know he ejected, but they don't know how badly he was hurt and whether he died in the desert from his injuries, whether he froze to death, like I said, very cold, and succumbed to the elements. But so no, definitively, we don't know how he died.
Okay. I have another question, or a question about the British boy that was in the picture you had shown us earlier. How did the Iraqis capture this 5-year-old British boy, and how would a young boy be in that war region?
So this would have been before the war started. I believe his family, maybe his father worked in the oil industry, so the family lived there in Kuwait. And I mean, Kuwait was peaceful. There was no trouble up until right before the invasion. So they were just people were working there. People would take vacations there. It's a very wealthy country. And as soon as Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait, the intelligence services started rounding up out of hotels, wherever, all these civilians.
All right, I have time for 2 more questions. So here's our first of our last 2. How did they get the aerial shots of the smart bombs going off?
Well, aircraft carry cameras.
Okay.
So, then later on, after they get back from their mission, they can review what happened on the mission. I mean, that's important intelligence too. So basically, if you remember looking at watching those bombs go down elevator shafts or whatever the case may be, you were looking at what was an aircraft's camera was picking up.
Excellent. And for this last question, I'm actually going to invite back our executive director, Kowalski Salter. I'm going to actually throw this question over to him. Thanks for coming back, Crew. So this guest would like to know more about the 1st Infantry Division during Desert Storm. And please know that we are going to be covering more of this story throughout the year. So this is just one of many Desert Storm offerings we're going to be giving you this year. But Crew, could you tell us a little bit more about how the 1st Infantry Division was involved and any specific units?
Okay, yeah, so the 1st Infantry Division had all 3 brigades serving. They had 1 Fort Brigade that was stationed in Germany. They had 3 brigades at Fort Riley. That would have been about 10,000 soldiers, give or take, because the brigade has about 3,500. They had Davarti Division Artillery. We'll hear more about that next month. They had Engineer Brigade, and they had separates. I'm an air defense artillery soldier, so we are a separate battalion. They would have had an air defense battalion, a signal battalion, intelligence units, so about 15,000 soldiers. And you saw the map that Jim showed. So they were part of the 7th Corps. The 7th Corps had 4 divisions, if I remember right, and they were the 2nd from the left, if I remember right. And they went over the berms actually on the 23rd, about a day earlier, because General Schwarzkopf had concluded that the air campaign had gone so well. And then, of course, 100 hours later, they were back. Now, just to bring this back to our museum, we have an exhibition of Bradley where we actually have one of the fights where Greg Fontenot, who led his unit across the berms, and you can actually hear the actual battle. So just in a nutshell, that's mainly what the 1st Infantry Division did. But they also had the 1st Brigade that came from Germany serve as what we call stevedores. They actually helped unload some of the soldiers who were coming from the States before they participated in the buildup in January and the fight in February.
Excellent. Thanks for doing that. And like I said, this is just the start of our conversations about Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield, all that in this year. So we will be talking more about that, specifically our February 24th presentation, which is with a veteran of the 1st Infantry Division. So please come back to learn more about that. But before I send everybody on our way, I do want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. If I didn't get to your question, I apologize. I do see them and I'll be forwarding them over to Jim. So hopefully he'll be able to get back to you. I do want to remind everybody that our next date with history is on Thursday, February 4th. And it is Go for Broke, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team with Neil Yamamoto. Please join us for that. Again, it is a 7 p.m. start time, free registration, register online, and we hope to see you there. Last but certainly not least, I do want to say a very special thank you to all of our Illinois State teachers who are joining us tonight for their professional development. Please remember, teachers, that to complete your professional development and receive the credit, to go back to the email was sent to you by our educator, Melissa Tyre. And there are 2 forms for you to fill out in there to complete your professional development. Thank you for joining us. All right, everybody, have a great night, and we'll see you in February.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was great.
Thank you,
Jim. Thank you, Kowalski. Good night, everybody.
Evening. Take care. Bye-bye.